Hi everyone, thanks for visiting my channel. I hope you all are hanging in there and doing well today. I know there's a lot of crazy stuff going on, a lot of uncertainty, but I'm praying for you and I hope everything is going well on your end. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Carol, the Thrifty Chic Housewife. If you enjoy the content you find here, please consider subscribing, like and share my videos, and follow me on social media, and I will leave all of the information in the description box for you below. So, today, let's talk about baking bread. You guys, this is one of the easiest loaves of bread you will ever make. It's great for beginners and it is so delicious, and it honestly could not be easier. You can use either bread flour or all-purpose flour. I'm going to be using bread flour. If you want, the bread flour will give it a denser texture and a chewier texture. But all-purpose flour is great. As a matter of fact, many of the recipes, and they're all extremely similar, when you look up no knead bread, they're all very similar, but a lot of them call for just all-purpose flour. Personally, I love bread flour. I love that chewy texture. This bread has a nice crunchy crust on the outside, and it's nice and fluffy and chewy on the inside if you use the bread flour. If you just use all-purpose flour, it's just a nice fluffy loaf. You can also add in a little bit of whole wheat flour if you'd like. I don't recommend using all whole wheat flour. It would be extremely dense. I would do half and half, but that's just my preference. Certainly you can experiment and judge for yourself, but it honestly couldn't be easier. It's just a stir and go kind of thing. The other ingredients you're going to need is some yeast. You can use regular yeast or you can use instant or rapid rise yeast. I'm going to be using instant yeast, but the process is the same. It doesn't really matter. We need some warm water, and then you're going to need some salt. So just very few ingredients that you probably already have in your pantry. And then the other thing you're going to need is a Dutch oven. Now, a word about your Dutch ovens. Mine is a Lodge enameled, it's made by Lodge, and it's an enameled cast iron Dutch oven, which I love. But the manufacturer's instructions on that say to not heat it empty, which is part of the instructions for baking this no knead bread. I'm not sure about Le Creuset or Staub or some of the other enameled cast iron Dutch ovens that are out there. You may want to check the manufacturer of whatever one that you have to see if they recommend heating it empty, but I have a solution for that. I'm going to be adding some water to mine when I put it in the oven to heat. That way it's not empty, but it's still getting warm. And the idea of baking it in a Dutch oven, it's creating steam as it bakes. So the addition of the water is not a big deal. And then we'll just dump it out. Once my pot is hot, I dump out the water and then I put my bread in. So to me, that's a great way to solve the problem. If you want to take the chance with whatever Dutch oven you have, that's totally fine. Or I would check your manufacturer's instructions for your Dutch oven. If you do not have a Dutch oven, you can certainly still do this bread. You can just put it on a baking sheet, and then when you put it in the oven, put like a cake pan underneath it and add about 1 inch or so of boiling water to your pan, and that way as it bakes, it's that steam is being released in your oven and kind of doing the same thing. So you don't have to have a Dutch oven if you don't have one, but they do a wonderful job of baking this bread. The other thing I wanted to mention is a handy dandy tool that I enjoy. This is called a Danish whisk, and I learned about this from Linda's Pantry several years ago. But it's a tool that I really enjoy. It's great for mixing bread. You don't even need a mixer for this bread. You just need a bowl and something to stir with. This is great. So for those of you who aren't familiar and you are interested in giving it a try, I highly recommend one. They're not expensive and they're great for mixing bread by hand. If you do not have one, just use a wooden spoon, no worries. Because we're just gonna do a rough mix. There's not much to it at all. And then the other thing you need to know ahead of time is this is going to take a long rise. You want a minimum of 6 hours for it, all the way up to 18. I highly recommend the longer rise time because that gives it almost a sourdough-like flavor and texture. It's really delicious. The longer that it sits, the more flavor is going to develop, and it makes the bread really good. So I highly recommend the longer rise time, but that's up to you. So what we're going to do is we're just going to roughly mix things together. You're going to leave it in the bowl that you mix it in, cover the bowl, and you're just going to let it hang out on your counter for 6 to 18 hours. And then we're going to shape it and then bake it in our oven. Super simple, super delicious, and I know you're going to love it. Okay guys, here we go. Super simple stuff here. I have 3 cups of my flour in my bowl, and to that we are going to add 1 teaspoon of yeast. And we're going to add 2 teaspoons of salt. I'm using sea salt. And then I'm just going to take my handy dandy little Danish whisk. Just kind of whisk that together. And then we're going to take 1.5 cups of warm water. Make sure it's not too warm. And then we're just going to give that a stir. We just start looking for a shaggy dough here. Now, you guys have heard me talk about this before, that sometimes, depending on your humidity in your kitchen, you may need more water. My flour is pretty dry. It's not as wet as it needs to be, so I'm going to add a little bit more. And you just want to add a tablespoon or 2 at a time. You don't want it too wet, but you want it wet enough that everything can come together. And the dough should clean your bowl. And again, you can do this with a wooden spoon. You don't need the whisk. But that looks pretty good. Just wipe off my whisk. We're going to cover it up and put him to bed and let him just relax and hang out for the next 18 hours. So I will bring you back tomorrow. We'll shape it and bake it off. Good morning, everyone. We are back. My dough has had a nice long rest overnight. It's been about 18 hours since we put it to bed. So now we're ready to shape it. We're gonna let it rise a second time, but just briefly. I do have my oven preheated to 450 degrees. So what we're gonna do now is we are going to put just a little bit of flour on our countertop and a little bit on our parchment paper. You're gonna want a sheet of parchment paper. And then we're gonna take our dough. Isn't that beautiful? Lots of beautiful bubbles, but it's flattened on top, and that's what we're looking for. So we're just gonna coax it out of our bowl. And then what I like to do, I think you can see okay, is I just take we're gonna shape this into a ball. So I just take the corners and just kind of pile them up to shape it into a ball. And then what I like to do is I take it and I flip it over. You can continue to shape it a little bit more if you want to. Flip it over onto the piece of parchment. Make sure it's nice and round. I think you can see that pretty good. And then we're going to take just a tiny bit of flour and just sprinkle it across the top. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to take our bowl and just cover the dough while it rests and rises a little bit for 30 minutes. And during the 30 minutes, let me wipe off my hands. While our dough is resting, we want to preheat our Dutch oven. And this is what I mentioned earlier. I'm not comfortable just heating mine dry. My manufacturer's instructions, and mine is a Lodge, says to not do that. So I'm just going to put a little bit of water in the bottom of mine so that there's something in it. I don't want my enamel to crack. And I'm going to put the lid on, and we're going to put it in the oven and let it warm up for the 30 minutes while our dough is resting and doing a little bit of a raise too. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then when our 30 minutes are up, I'll bring you back and we will put it in the Dutch oven, dump out the water, put in the dough in our Dutch oven, and then we're going to bake it at 450 degrees for 30 minutes with the lid on, and then we're going to bake it another 15 minutes, 10 to 15, with the lid off. Okay guys, we're back. make sure that when you empty your water out of your pot, if you're doing that method, that you are careful and don't get burned. That's the only bad part of that. So now we're just going to go ahead and pop our dough into our Dutch oven. And if you have much overhang from your parchment paper, you can trim it. I don't have too much, so I think we're good. And we're just going to pop the lid onto our Dutch oven, and we're going to put it back in the oven for 30 minutes. And then after 30 minutes, we're going to take off the lid and bake it an additional 10 to 15. We want a beautiful golden color on the crust. So it'll be at your discretion how much color you want. So just keep an eye on it at 10 to 15. Oh my goodness. Do you see that? How beautiful is that? So I baked it for the 30 minutes, like I said, with the lid on. Took the lid off and baked it for another about 12 minutes to get that nice golden color. You could even leave it in there a little bit longer if you want a deeper color, but that's pretty good for me. So we're gonna let it cool a little bit. You don't wanna ever cut it into really hot bread. I know it's so tempting, it smells so good. But we're gonna let it rest for about 15 minutes or so for it to cool off, and when I bring you back, I'm going to show you how beautiful it is on the inside. Did you see that beautiful bread footage? Doesn't that look delicious? It is so perfect. It's nice and crispy on the outside, and tender and beautiful on the inside. Look at those beautiful pockets. Who doesn't want to eat that? So good. So let's give it a try. See how we did. I used the bread flour, so I have a denser texture to mine than you would if you used all-purpose flour. Did you hear that crunch? And it's nice and chewy from the bread flour. It is so good, you guys. And how easy was that? So if you don't want that denser texture, just use all-purpose flour. But I love that chewiness. It's so good. And the smell of yeasty bread, wonderful. Perfect for everything we're going through right now. Delicious comfort food. Super simple. Great for making sandwiches. Great for making paninis. Great for making toast. Put a smear of mashed avocado on top with some seasonings and fresh tomato, and you have delicious avocado toast. Perfect. Great for peanut butter and jelly. Great just for plain old butter and jam. So I hope you have your butter and your jam ready, because you're going to want it for this bread. This is one of the easiest breads you can make, you guys. So I hope that you'll give it a try. As always, if you have any comments or questions for me, leave them in the comment section. Like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you next time. Take care, guys.